Dude, I'm aiming. I'm going to run the Melbourne Marathon later in the year.
Oh,
That's the
nice.
plan. And I was having a look at your YouTube channel yesterday, and I noticed actually that you were pretty heavily involved in the world of marathon running yourself. And my problem is, dude, I love the long stuff. Like the long stuff is it's my favorite way to train. It's the most enjoyable kind of training sessions to me. But the problem is because I had so long out of competitive running, I've come back into it just with the attitude that all right, I'll just get back into it like I used to. And
Yep.
in about the first 6 weeks, I reckon I've just hit my second calf strain. So I'm trying
Oh,
to
no.
navigate this frustrating little world of injury because I was very lucky when I was competing. I never really had anything serious. And now I've got back into it and started going, all right, I'll do some K reps. Yesterday, I just did like 13 Ks around an oval and I got to the end of it. And I was going to do 14K. And at 13K, I felt a little familiar ping. And I thought, oh, I know what that is. I'm just going to stop. And I woke up this morning
Yeah.
a bit tender, but that's a long way of saying I'm joining the marathon bandwagon slowly. I've just got to get my body into shape to do it. But when did you make that move into it, man? Because I was saying before we hit record, the first time we met and the last time we raced, I think was probably 2010 to
Yep.
around 2013 is where we're meeting each other here. You tore me up in the first meet over 1500, which was very
Oh, did
humbling
I?
when you became the Aussie Uni, Australian
Oh,
University
yeah, the
champs
Aussie Uni Games. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
that you won. But man, yeah, it's a bit of a change for you now. So you're venturing out into the marathon.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about getting into, the marathon and hurting your calf. That actually happened to me when I first started marathons, probably 5.5 years ago. I returned back. I was 84 kilos at the time. I just spent 2 years working full time. So for context, I'm 71 now, so obviously a lot heavier. I was, working full time in Singapore for a year and a half. 70 hours a week. Left that space because I was like, I don't really think I want to do that, and I want to try my luck at one more startup. And that's around the time I started training for the marathon. And in my first 6 to 9 months, I was just like what you described. Started running, little niggle, had to stop for a week. A few times I was like, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be able to do this. And I mean, the original challenge was to try and break 3 hours. That was all it was. One of my friends, actually, you would know of all people, you would know Nick Simmons from the US, who's one of America's best middle
Yes.
distance runners. In 20, I'm gonna guess 2016. Or maybe it was late, very late 2016. He decided to enter the Honolulu Marathon as part of his company's Run Gum. He wanted to do a bit of a promotion around that, and he tried to break 3 hours, and he went 3:02, a bit of a tough course. And one of my friends is friends with him, and I wouldn't say I'm friends with Nick, but I sort of know him. And one of my friends said, "Do you reckon I could break 3 hours after we saw that challenge?" And I said, 4:15 per K. I was like, yeah, I reckon I could if I trained for a few months. And my other friend said, no, you couldn't do that. I don't reckon you could. You're too much of a sprinter. And so I tried to prove him wrong over the next 6 months, and I did run 2:59:38, I think, in the first one. But it was I would argue that training block and that run was harder than 2:21 now, which is weird because obviously very different paces. But yeah, so it was it was late 2016 or early 2017 when I got back into it, and it's honestly sometimes crazy for me to even think now that that I've improved to this point, because back then I thought 2:45 maybe I could run it someday. And even back when I was doing middle distance with you, a bunch of, you often have friends that are sort of clueless about running. They ask, oh, what about marathon? Will you ever do marathon? And I just dismissed every time. Like, I'll never do a marathon. So it's funny what can happen and how things can change over time. Yeah.
Oh, you're kind of inspiring me a little bit because I officially stopped running competitively back in 2014, and I think at that time I was like, yeah, I've sort of had enough. It was pretty clear at the time. I had big expectations. I was like, well, I've got goals to run at like a really high world class level. And by the time you're about 25, you start to get a bit of a gauge as to where you're at. And I thought, okay, well, and plus a couple of little health concerns. I thought, it's maybe not my thing. And Mark Blitzars had just got drafted. So I thought, I'll go back to the
Mm.
footy world. Surely I'm better at footy than him. And long story short, that didn't work out. And I thought, oh, well, my days in the distance running world are done. And like you, like I don't know what your weight was, but I always promised my wife, I said, once I finish running, I'll get in the gym and I'll cover these ribs up and give your husband with some biceps and some pecs. And she
Yeah.
goes, well, that sounds a lot better, actually. And then about 2 years ago, I started to get the bug just working with athletes and just sort of started to venture back into watching a few more races. And before I knew it, I was starting to train for, this is actually more than 2 years. This is like 5 years ago now. I started to train for the Melbourne Marathon, which I ran 3:05 in, which my audience is so sick of
Oh,
hearing about. It was
yeah.
a 79-minute first half and whatever it is to equal
Ooh.
3:05 at the end.
So
And
you're on track for
I thought, all right,
2:38 through half.
dude, I was going through half gone. Marathon running is the easiest thing in the whole world. I can't believe all the complaints. And I got to about 25K, and I was like, I don't think there's anything harder in the whole world than marathon running. So I thought, I can't leave 3:05 as my time. And I had a mate say to me 6 months ago, he's like, mate, I could imagine you having like a second mini career over the marathon. And just that comment had played on my mind a little bit. So hearing
Yep.
from you and what you've done, I can see how you get the bug just going down that road. And if I can tie it together, and because I'm thinking like my goal, if I can run the marathon, have a good one, would be maybe 2:45. But if I run 2:45, I'll be like you, where it's like, well, if I run 7 days a week and I do some stretches and a bit more strength work and, show up a bit more consistently and plan the races, maybe I'll jump out there and have a crack at hitting 2:29. So I can see how
I
it
can.
kind of happens. But yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I can tell you right now, based on, so it's interesting because your 20s and your middle distance days, and about the time you decided to pull away from middle distance, was almost identical to mine. I mean, we're similar age. We race each other through. I don't know if you remember this, but strangely, I do remember racing at least in the same competition in high school. You were doing 3K and 1500. I was doing 8 and 15. I think it was in Adelaide, or it might have been Melbourne. But either way, we've been essentially doing the same events all the way through until 26. And I had the same sort of thoughts around that age of, okay, well, I really want to make the Olympics and the world champs. I'm not quite there. I'm just that one level behind, really similar to you. And then I decided that, maybe it's never going to happen, and pulled away. And I do know, based on, your junior days of doing 1500, 3K, 5K, that you have at least I believe this. Because I've seen it happen over other people's careers. I think you have the ability to run significantly faster than what you've just said. But the thing is, it will take time for your body to adjust and figure out. It's taken me 5.5 years for my body to more or less completely. I don't know exactly what the terminology to use is, switching from sort of the faster twitch to the slower twitch, but you would remember that back then when I was running sort of 1:48, 800, doing a 200-meter repeat in 25, 26 seconds was pretty easy for me now. And there's no way I can do that now. Like I would struggle to even run 28, I reckon, for a 200. But I can very easily run 320 per K for 20K almost any day at this point, which is something I never would have been able to do back then. So there's obviously some sort of physiology that's changed over time. And I know, based on your early years of running and your basic physiology, that you could probably run well into the two teens, but it will just take time for you to actually, for your body to make those changes and to go through that process. And it'll also take a bunch of marathons to figure out how do you do this, because you experienced going through in 79 feeling easy, but then everything changed because probably you hadn't done the correct training fueling, as in your body being able to actually run at the right pace in training, but also you probably didn't, I'm guessing, understand how the carbohydrates came into it as well, and you probably didn't fuel very well for that. And that's something that we all have to learn over time. And I'm still working out the carbohydrate stuff now. I'm trying to run sort of 217, 218. I still don't think I've nailed it. So yeah, it's interesting, the journey that you go on, and I really hope that in a few years that you're staring down the path of 220. And I know it's possible. It's just a matter of sort of letting the time take its course and going after each marathon block and trying to learn from each one.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. You've hit the nail on the head. And that was one thing that, as soon as the race had finished, I was like, all right, hey, Tice, like next time, maybe do more than just one 30K run. Because I was going into it like I was just trying to run a park run for 5K. I was like, yeah, my fitness is thereabouts. I'll go out and just see how we go. And even though I've heard from and had the opportunity to speak to so many guns over the years about the marathon, I knew the approach was the complete opposite. But I was like, you know what, for what it's worth, we'll just get a bit of a taste for it. But dude, you're getting me all inspired. The one thing is vanity that's turning me off, because those pecs that I held onto so dearly for a few years, I know they only take about 6 long runs to completely disappear. So if I can just let go of the vanity element, my wife reminds me that my wrinkles are pretty deep now anyway, so I don't think a few extra kilos of loss is going to make that much of a
Yeah,
difference
it won't
to
matter.
the appeal factor. So what are you going to do? So how many have you run now?
I've started. I tried to work out the other day. I think I've started 14 and finished 9. So I've DNF'd a few due to a few reasons. Most of them have just been really severe muscle cramps that I just haven't been able to get through. So yeah, finished 9 and yeah, started at 2:59. And my last one was 4 days ago in Osaka. I tried to break 2:20 again. I've tried to break 2:20 a few times, but I didn't. I ran 2:21. Yeah, so 9 deep. Learning every time. I'm learning that the weather is a very huge deal, especially for someone that has a high sweat rate like myself. So now when I'm trying to run fast times, I'm looking for races that will be colder, if possible, because I know that if it's over 15 degrees, my chances of running a PB at least are pretty much gone. Just because I've done a sweat rate test and it's a pretty high score. So yeah, I've done them all over the place. Been very lucky to have done Berlin a few times, Valencia a few times. My best is from a bit of a unique one at Indianapolis, which I ran for a bit of a strange reason, which we can talk about later. But yeah, that was quite a fast course. So that was at the end of 2021, and the next one's London. So in 7.5 weeks, I'm backing up pretty quickly from Osaka, having a week off now, or at least a very light week, and then going for another 6 week block leading into London, where try and break 2:20 again. But I've tried a few times now, and I wonder if my body's able to actually do it at this point, because I feel like my aerobic capacity can maybe go 2:16, 2:17, but I can't figure out how to finish a marathon without pretty severe cramping in my hamstrings and calves. It's happened every single one. Even when I ran 2:20, I had cramps at the end of that race. So yeah, challenge. I'm still trying to figure out after 9 marathons, still haven't conquered it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I saw you had the precision hydration shirt on in one of your photos or one of your videos the other day, and I've had Andy Blow on from Precision Hydration on here a couple of times, and he's a really interesting guy to speak to about the sweat rate and the sweat test. And have you had a chat with him about that kind of stuff? Because I could
Yeah,
imagine he'd be a pretty helpful bloke to help you get your head around it.
Yeah, so I did a sweat test with Andy actually at Precision Fuel and Hydration in the south of the UK, and we've been working with them for quite a few months now, and they've been a really good partner to work with. Um, I'm not 100% convinced, and Andy might disagree with me on this, but I'm not sure anyone knows the real truth to this answer. And I'm not convinced that the cramping is due to any sort of nutrition issue. I think it's something else, because I've loaded on magnesium and sodium and potassium, for that matter, the three things that when you look into any sort of cramping online, you'll find that a lack of those three things can cause cramps. But if you look at more scientific studies around cramping, in the context of exercise, so not in the context of in bed, where that might be a fueling issue, or just walking around getting general muscle cramps, but at the end of a race, it tends to be more specific to having some sort of strength problem, with your muscles just not being able to tolerate what you're asking it to do, basically. And so then maybe doing some sort of really specific strength regime, or I thought that doing really an excessive amount of long runs would be the key, because that's essentially pushing your muscles to the limit many times in terms of the duration, but that didn't seem to help either. So I think leading into London, I'm going to try and get in the gym a bit more and do some really specific strength work, and maybe even some plyometrics on there. The hurdle for me is that I'm traveling around so much, changing locations and changing apartments, that of all people, you would know that one pretty key thing to get into strength work is to have some sort of consistent environment and consistent gym to turn up to, where your environment and you know the machines to work with. I'm moving around a lot, so it makes that pretty hard. I'm always having to seek out a new gym, and I mean, here in Japan, nothing's even in English really, so trying to find a gym to here is even a bit of a challenge. So I'll do my best. Luckily, over the next 7 weeks before London, I'm only in 3 different locations, so that's not that much. And so I'm maybe ahead of time. I'll try and figure out the best gyms to use. So we'll try that, and if that doesn't work, then yeah, maybe I'm just stuck with the cramping and I have to figure out how to just manage it best. But we'll see. It's crazy to think that 9 marathons deep and 5.5 years into it, I still haven't worked out how to get to the end of a race without cramps. But I do know it's very individual. Some people just don't get them at all. I have one friend who I'm very envious of on the Gold Coast, who used to be a runner, now just finds it funny to do marathons without training. and he's run a 3:08 marathon. Now he ran a 3:08 marathon last year, not really having trained at all, and didn't cramp. And I was like, how can you run a marathon without training and not cramp? And then I train 135K a week for 8 weeks or 12 weeks, and I cramp. Like, how does that work? So I don't know. Doesn't seem to be any sort
It's
of clear answer. Yeah,
it's funny and it's frustrating. It's weird, the marathon. I feel like it's both
it's very weird.
the
It's
tor-
a very weird
the
event.
torture, yeah, the torture and the appeal of the marathon is just how hard it is to try and get your head around all the different areas that there are to cover. Like we've ticked over a couple of them, from nutrition to training to strength and conditioning. It's just yeah, I've never spoken to an athlete at the end of a marathon. They're like, oh, I've completely figured it out. Like I know exactly what to do
No,
always. Now there's
never
always a
heard it
few
either. I've
questions
never
or
heard those
that.
words.
So it's I guess it's the thing that keeps us coming back. But you're right, it's an interesting take as well, because you hear cramps and I automatically just thought of uh, nutrition, or the liquids and stuff that you're taking in. But it is interesting that the other side of the factor is potentially like a strength and conditioning routine. Did you say, like, even at Indianapolis when you ran your 220, that was something that was plaguing you the last couple of Ks as well?
Yeah, yeah, I haven't finished a marathon without cramping. So in Indianapolis, I managed to get to about 39 without any cramps. And I was actually on pace for 218 low, 218.15, 218.20 until then. And then I lost about 2 minutes in the last 3K. If my Strava graph is pretty funny, it's just 317, 316 pace, and all of a sudden I'm going 345, 401. Like, it just flows right out. Yeah, I haven't yet finished one. The closest I came, that was very close to getting to the end without cramping. At Berlin Marathon last year, I cramped very little, but I also had another injury that I was carrying with me, so that was not fun. I had a problem with my lower back, which was presenting pain in my upper hamstring, so I was sort of trying to manage that. But I cramped very little in that race too. But then, unfortunately, in Osaka, I cramped quite a lot, which was disappointing. And I think, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's almost like one thing that's because they've haunted me my whole marathon career, if you want to call it a career. It's almost like when I started cramping at 31.8K the other day, a little cramp, I feel like it's a little bit of a psychological hole, in a sense of when that started, I became a little bit stressed and a little bit worried about the final 10K. And I wonder if that just exacerbates the problem because I think all of a sudden I'm tense. I'm running a little bit more like in fear, rather than a marathon's so much about like flow and efficiency and staying relaxed. And I think the problem is, I don't know if I'll be able to really verbalize this very well, but once I start cramping, I think it sends a signal in my brain that like there's a problem and I need to combat this and manage this. Because and the reason why I say this is because I had some friends on course that said I looked very different at 30K to 35. The way I was running looked very different, a lot worse obviously at 35. And I think I tense up, and then all of a sudden my technique changes. I'm a lot more nervous and concerned and stressed, and I almost think that makes the problem worse. So I don't know how to combat that, but that's the beauty of the marathon. And what you said before is so true. Like, I've never heard anyone say that they've nailed the marathon and figured it out. And in a way, it makes it an addictive thing, because you never feel like you finish it being like, I've done it. I've done that. That's the best I can possibly do. I don't think anyone ever really gets to that point. Maybe unless they win the Olympics. I don't think anyone gets to a point where they're like, that's it. That's the best I can possibly do. That training block and that race. And in a strange way, people that are maybe perfectionists or whatever. I'm not necessarily a perfectionist, but I know people that are, that they never stop, because they never get to the point where they think that they've conquered it. Whereas I think over like 100 meters, or even the events that we were at, 800 and 1500, a lot of people probably do get to that point where they're like, okay, that last 8 weeks of training was pretty much perfect, and that race was pretty much perfect. Like, maybe neither of us had that experience, but we definitely know other people that did. And yeah, the marathon is a real beast of an event that no one ever conquers. And I don't ever think I'll get to the point of running a marathon and thinking, well, that's as best as I can possibly do. And yeah, it makes it for a really challenging thing to conquer, because there's just no end to it. But
It's so true.
I
It's
don't
so
think I'll give
true.
up on trying to break 220. I'm going to just keep trying to figure it out, because I know I can do it. It's just about how do I get to the line without cramping. And then I think 216 Maybe 2:15 is possible at some point soon. I have a hard time thinking past 2:15 because I just don't think, like, I mean, sort of switching to a slightly different thing, but still relating to the marathon. I think your marathon is very much dependent on how fast you are over 5 and 10K. So if my 10K limit is 30 flat, let's say, for example, which is probably about what it is. I've never actually run 30 flat, but probably reckon I could. That's 3 minutes per K. And that means that I don't think I can possibly do a marathon at faster than, say, 3:12, because you know that the threshold is probably right around that 3:05. You can only ever run a few percent slower than your threshold for marathon. So I'd need to figure out how to run faster over 10K before I thought past 2:15, 2:16. And I've never really had any indication in training that I can go much faster than 30 flat for 10K. So that'd be another whole challenge in itself. But yeah, I'm definitely, you got to take a step back and think to yourself. And, when I was in the middle distance days, my threshold runs were at like 3:30 per K or 3:25 per K. So I've at least been able to improve on that for sure. So, but yeah, exciting that you've got, you must have 6 to 7 months to prepare for the London marathon. For the Melbourne marathon. So I'm curious to know, how do you get past this next stage of your little niggles, and what is your game plan going into that?
Well, it's a great question, man. Like, I think honestly, the first part for me was I think when it came to my actual running back in the day, I had very little injury. So I don't know. I don't think anything in terms of technique has changed that much when I run. Like, I look at myself in a video now, and I can't differentiate too much apart from carrying a bit more weight in how I run now than what I used to. So I I'm going to lay the technical side of it to rest for a little while. I think, honestly, and I've noticed this, is when I pick up the pace to a certain point, I think it's almost an intensity thing. Like, I'll go out, because the two times I've done my calves, the first one was in a 1K session the other day. I was about 100 meters. I was doing 6 by K, and it was the first time where it was like a first real hard workout where I was going out there, and I was sort of, it's slightly uphill. So for me, a hard workout there was, I was trying to do 3:30 up the hill and about 3:20 down the hill. And I got to about 100 meters short of the last rep, and that's where I felt it. And I was like, interesting. And then yesterday, I was just going for a bit of a run, because this is just the story of my life at the moment. Because on Sunday, I did 20K, and about 5K into the 20K run, I noticed like the inside part of my right Achilles started to, it wasn't a tear or a strain. It just felt like this dull ache. And I had slight memories of that feeling back on the track years and years ago. So I sort of was like, I'll keep running. And the pain, it didn't get worse. It just sort of maintained. So I was like, well, I can pretty comfortably run on this if it's not going to get worse. But then yesterday, I went into this run thinking, all right, I was going to do 14K. And my main concern was just this right Achilles. Anyway, I got into a bit of a flow where I had I was listening to this book that my wife recommended called The Nightingale. That finished. Then I just put on this cool little acoustic. I can't remember what they're tiny desks. These two like Ecuadorian guitar guys, and I just got into a rhythm. I got in a zone, and I looked down at my watch at one part, and my K was like 350. I was like, holy shit! Like, this is supposed to be just a cruisy run. And then I thought, well, I feel like I'm jogging, so I'll just keep rolling. And then, with a K to go, as I said, I felt that little twing in my left calf. So I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with the pace. So it's a long-winded answer for the eventual point to be, I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of what I'm adding to the schedule, like when this recovers and there's a little bit less pain, I'm going to introduce maybe some more skipping, some more calf work, because I hadn't done that much intense work through my calves for a long time. I'd been out jogging. But I just think the intensity that my calves experience through a session or through a faster run, it's hard to replicate in a jog. So I'm kind of hoping that it's going to be a little bit of load management. It's also going to be hopefully a temporary thing where my calves are just being welcomed back into the sport. And I've just got to try and find that balance in the meantime as to how hard or how fast I can push myself and keep my body in check. So I think probably the next 2 or 3 weeks I'm going to, the next week I won't run, and then I'll probably welcome back a couple of little jogs, and then maybe even spend the next 2 weeks after that just trying to nurture them back in before I do anything faster. And then yeah, just I think, man, a lot of load management. I'm very open to suggestions if you've got any ideas or
Yeah.
if you've got any knowledge on the area. 'Cause it's a very new kind of injury to me. As I said, I've never really experienced before now.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I put you on the spot there, didn't I? A bit with the plan, given that you're coming, trying to figure out that niggle. But no, I mean, I that sounds difficult to manage. But like I said to you before, it sounds very similar to when I just started my marathon journey. I had little niggle, little niggle here, little niggle there. So you know, don't let it. I mean, I'm sure it won't, but don't let it. You know, set you back too much mentally, because I think it's just your body trying to figure out what it can tolerate right now. And you, one thing I hope that you don't do is convince yourself that maybe your body can't do it. I think it's just an adjustment period. I'm no expert
Mhm.
here, and you definitely a physiotherapist would be a better person to speak to. But I think it's just about, you know, your muscles trying to remember exactly what you were doing and the intensity that you were doing it 10 to 15 years ago. And I'm sure that a little bit of rest and then returning to it, and doing that load management stuff will help, and just paying close attention to the little niggles and pains that pop up. It's funny you say that about the flow state that you got into when you were listening to you know, the podcast and the music, and all of a sudden you're running fast. Those situations are key, I think, to try and break through to the next level of fitness. But then at the same time, your brain's a the brain's a fascinating thing, in that if you get into those flow states, all of a sudden it can open up your mind to sort of, oh, I can do this, I can run this pace at this effort. This actually doesn't feel good, but
Dude, I had
sometimes
that
you
exact
can
moment yesterday.
sometimes
Yep.
and those I think those moments are what pushes the needle for us. And I've had probably 10 to 15 of them over the last few years, where all of a sudden there's a moment in a run or a moment in a training session where I'm like, I can do that. I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think 312 per K felt this easy. And but the problem is, the only problem with that is this, that when you get into those states of euphoria, if you want to call it that, it can sometimes send this bizarre message through your body that you don't really notice or feel any pains coming on. I don't really know how that works. So you've got to find this perfect balance in a weird way of finding those states, but then also being able to listen to anything that might be giving you a warning sign inside about, wait, my mind can do this, but my muscles can't yet. You just need to wait a
Mhm.
little bit of time until that catches up. Because yeah, I face ongoing Achilles pains still to this day. It sort of comes and goes, and I have to balance those two things of the levels to jump up in terms of aerobically, but then also making sure that my body can continue on those with those improvements as well. And sometimes it can't. Like sometimes I need to take a step back, and it was probably about 2 years ago now. I ran 224 in a marathon in Japan. Sorry, 3 years ago in Japan, and then my Achilles exploded, and I basically couldn't run for a year. And every time I tried to get back, I did run through that whole period, but just not being pain free. And I got to a bit of a sad point, which in retrospect was a good thing to experience, where I had to take 5 weeks completely off. And then when I came back, I was able to run pain free again, and then actually 14 weeks after that 5 week period off, I ran 220. So so yeah, and I remember the first 6 weeks coming back from that 5 weeks off, I was actually so careful about returning that I was often like running without music or podcasts, so that I could make sure I could listen to
Mm.
any sort of pain that might present itself. And yes, it was boring and bland. I remember doing a 20K steady run around a reservoir in Boulder without music and without podcasts in 35 degrees Celsius, and it was absolute hell. But
Oh,
I do remember thinking to myself, if any pain comes up here, I'm going to stop, because I want to make this marathon in, I think at the time it was in 10 weeks, because I've been back for 4. Yeah, so it's a tricky one, but you know, I'm sure that you'll figure it out, because you've got that early, you know, childhood or teenage years experience of running, and the muscle memory for you is real. Like you're going to get that fitness back and that muscle memory back really quickly. It's just a matter of time. So no, I'm excited to see how you do, man. I'm calling a 230, a 237 in Melbourne, and then a 226 shortly after, I reckon.
dude, you get me all inspired. I thought I was coming here to ask about you. I'm going to leave this podcast just feeling ready to go. Dude, it's very
Yeah.
interesting. You make a good point. I was running around yesterday, as I said, with these blokes playing guitar in my ear, and up until yesterday, like I remember about 6 weeks ago, I did a threshold, and I was going out, and my threshold was 344, and I just did 8K, and I got to the end, and I was amazed at how well I ran. I thought, this is incredible. Then
Mm.
yesterday, like the last 5Ks, I saw they were all, and it's sort of not bragging because you know the outcome of it. It ended with a calf strain, but
Yeah,
I was going around in 3:45, and I had that exact moment that you mentioned where you go, oh, I could run this pace if I do it well for a marathon. Like
yeah.
it just felt. I was guessing I was running about 4:30s. It just felt cruisy. So it's cool to hear that you had those little breakthrough moments as well. And
Oh
also
yeah,
very cool just to hear about your journey back into it, like after a little while away. I didn't realize how much our paths or trajectory sort of took the same route for a
yeah.
little while. But yeah, well, hey, right back at you. Like it's exciting to think that if this Indianapolis one with 2:18 on the cards with 3K to go, it seems like a distant or a foreign concept to even imagine running the times that you are now. But if my own trajectory goes in the direction you just called it, well, maybe maybe I could start in the row behind you at one marathon in the next few years. But are you dude training? I know you said you're running 135K a week, but are you training like a professional in the sense of like you're doing the strength, you're doing the running, you're doing the rehab and things like that, or are you just making it work with everything else you've got going on right now?
I wish you didn't ask that. So I'm going to answer it honestly. No, I'm not training like a professional. I should. I should because I've got all these ambitious goals and I've got all these. I'm making all these big announcements online that I'm going to try and run to sub 220. But the honest truth is, I'm not, and I should. And my excuse is that it's really tricky to well, firstly, it's a bit hard to train full time with a full time job, but it's made even harder when I'm always moving environments, and I do have the time for it. That's a garbage excuse to say I don't have the time. To say you don't have the time for something just means you don't want to prioritize it. Like I do want to prioritize it, but I think we're such creatures of habit that I'm finding it difficult to move around and change. So I'm in this Airbnb for 10 days in Tokyo, and then I go to another Airbnb in Berlin for 9 days, and then I go somewhere else for 8 days, and then somewhere else for 3 weeks, and moving in Portugal, and then all this moving around means I'm living out of a. I wish you could see it. I've got this suitcase here, and I've got no consistent environment to work with over time, and no consistent gym to turn up to. And like when you're in a home with the same people and the same places to put your keys and your wallet and your supplements, like protein and electrolyte drinks and these sorts of things, and the same gym to go to at the same time. I think that's the recipe to train like a true pro, and I've really struggled to find the way to do that. So I'm doing, you would know, I'm doing the minimum possible training to run 2:19. I haven't run 2:19, but that's what I'm trying to run, and that's just basically the running. So that's the 135K a week. I do no stretching. I do no rehab. Luckily, I haven't had an injury for a while, at least a serious one. I'm doing no strength. But you know what? I really want to try over the next. I'm your age. I'm pretty sure you're born in '87 as well. So we're getting up there
Yeah,
now. I just turned 36 last 2 weeks ago, and
I'm 10 days behind you.
yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, yeah, and so we start to think like, well, by 40, 45, it's hard to really improve from there. Although, mind you, Lisa Waitman just at 44 years old just improved on her marathon time, so maybe that statement's wrong. And Sinead Diver's still running national records at what is that 46. But either way, we
Yeah.
know that our time is the clock is ticking a little bit to some extent, and so I do wonder maybe I really should at some point try and train like a pro and just see how far I can go. I think it's one of those things where I probably would regret it when I'm a bit older that I never really, really trained as hard and as best as I possibly could. But I'm doing 95% of it, and I guess one other point to make that works in my favor is that I'm fortunate enough to go to altitude quite a lot through the year. On work trips where I'm doing content, and so I'm able to utilize those trips and train at altitude, which is something that maybe a lot of pros don't get the chance to do for one reason or other. Maybe they have a family, or they don't have enough funding to go to altitude. So I do have that benefit that I'm able to do the altitude work, but I've never really been able to figure out how to do the proper strength training and the proper rehab stuff that really probably does allow pro athletes to elevate themselves to the absolute highest level and the best ability that they can be at. So I have been thinking a lot about this. That question that you asked is a really good one. It's like maybe I should just for 6 months see what would happen. Like maybe could I run 2:12 or 2:13 if I did those things? I really don't know. Like I said, I think that would boil down to improving the 5 and 10K. Down to a 29 low and a 13 high, which currently I'm not capable of doing. I don't think so. So yeah, I'll see. I do think we've got. I'm glad Lisa and Sinead are running these times because it probably makes both of us think, oh, maybe we do have a bit more time than we thought. Yeah.
It is. It's really that Sinead one. I think she's 47. I don't want to chuck numbers on her that are not there just yet, but I'm pretty sure I heard she's 47, which is just insane to think about how well
Yeah.
she's traveling. You're right. It definitely motivates me a little bit. What
Yeah.
So you got this week off.
Yep.
What, the 6 and a bit weeks leading into London? What does that look like? Sort of turning it around on such short notice. I noticed Brett came out and ran the Australian record after a fairly short
Yep.
turnaround, which was amazing to me. It seems like something that's sort of happening more now than it ever did, even sort of 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's another great one. Question that is. I think, Brett was able to run 2:09 at London, and then 8 weeks later, or maybe 9 weeks later, it wasn't 10. I think it was 8 or 9. He ran 2:07:31, was it, and broke the Australian record at Fukuoka. I think I think the super shoes play a pretty big role in the recovery from these events. I think that's. I mean, everyone would agree that do a marathon in the old school flats and then do a marathon in the Vaporflies or the Alpha Flies or the Adios Pro 3s, and it's a very different recovery process. My first marathon I did in the Nike Streaks. You'd probably remember them. No carbon plate, no Zoom foam, nothing, just a dead flat shoe. And I reckon it took me probably about 2.5 weeks for me to feel like I was recovered. Now in these Alpha Flies, honestly, it's crazy to say. I mean, I'm 4 days post marathon. I feel fully recovered at this point, and that's been mostly the same for the previous few marathons, 4 or 5 days. Now that's not true. I'm not fully recovered, but at least my muscles are giving me that indication that I am. There's probably still some neural and general fatigue that lingers a little bit more. But I do think backing up is possible for that reason, but also I do think backing up is easier and more doable if you're a runner that's had a lot more or that's had more lifetime mileage. I think lifetime mileage is a thing that's not spoken about that much, but I think it's actually a pretty big deal, is that when you have more years and more volume of running in your legs, it appears to me like this means you might get injured more easily, potentially, but you also have the ability to recover faster and also just simply do, more training in general. That's what it appears to me, because I've got quite a few friends that have been running, that are around our age, that have been running since they were 17, 18, 19. They seem to be able to back up pretty well from marathons and do another marathon shortly after. Whereas people that I coach that are new to running have tried it, and the success rate doesn't seem as high. They just need more time to recover from each marathon. After the experiment with having 5 weeks totally off and then running a 2:20 14 weeks later, that really flipped a switch in my mind to be like, okay, well, total rest is okay. Total rest and total time off is fine. It just has to be done at the right times. And given I just did a huge training block and I was I ran 2:21. Whether I was in better shape or not is an argument for people that can if they want to debate that. And I say that because obviously I struggled with the cramping towards the end. But I think taking a full week off, I will basically not really lose anything at all fitness wise, especially given the 2:21 race itself is such a big training effort. That is basically a 2-hour 21 threshold run. So I'm going to take that forward with me as well. But having 7 days off and then a 6-week training block, I should start that 6-week training block in 2:20-ish shape, give or take a few minutes. My training sort of philosophy, I've been coaching myself. It's pretty simple. 2 harder workouts a week, one being in a long run on the weekend and the other one being midweek. And the midweek sessions normally at sort of 5K, 10K, half marathon effort around that threshold or a little bit quicker VO2 max. And the long run tends to be between 32 and 42K with sometimes it'll be with some marathon effort work in there. Sometimes it won't. It'll depend a little bit on the week and what's going on in the week and how far I am out from the race. I think the 6-week block will serve well. I know a lot of examples of people that have done a big training block, raced okay or poorly, had a short had a short break, done a short training block, and then run really well. And the belief is maybe that the first training block, maybe you were potentially overtraining a little bit, or maybe you just didn't quite nail the first one. You needed a little bit of rest to completely, absorb all of the training in the first block. And then oftentimes the short second block is just the way to sort of top up on the fitness a little bit, but go in maybe a little bit fresher into the second race.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't ever really looked at Brett's Strava to know what he did between those two races, but I'd be curious to know if he took any rest after the first one or not. But it'd be interesting to see if I'm able to back up well or not. I'm pretty confident in being able to do so. I think the older I get, the more I'm realizing that listening to the body is the number one thing by far to gauge your training. I could easily go and set this perfect training plan from now leading into London, but if I try and do an interval session this Monday and I feel really tired still, there's no point in following that plan anymore. I have to pull back and reassess and readjust and go, nope, I wasn't ready for that. I have to push that workout back another 5 days or whatever it ends up being. So yeah, it's super, super important to pay attention to the fatigue and energy and just listening to the body in general.
Yeah. Are you doing 32 to 42 Ks week in, week out, or is that your marathon specific build up for like the block leading into it?
Just the block leading in. Yeah, and there's no way I'd do a 32K run if it didn't have a marathon coming up.
I was so impressed. I was so impressed.
Yeah. No, that's normally, so I'd normally start the marathon specific block about 10 weeks before, if I had the 10 weeks. This time it's obviously 6. But that's just because London's in 7.5 weeks from now. And I say 6 weeks, it's because I factor in 1 week post Osaka Marathon. The last week is not really a training week, it's a taper week. So there's sort of 6 weeks sitting in the middle there. So those 32K runs would start about 10 weeks before the race. And outside of the marathon specific block, I think it'd be pretty difficult, at least for me, to sustain those runs year round, probably mentally more than physically. I think I really need to have a race pretty soon for me to get up to do those runs really well. I don't know how people do 35, 40K runs. I remember one day, correct me if I'm wrong, was it you? Am I thinking, I'm sorry if I've mixed you up with someone else, but did you do a 100K run once?
Yeah, I did.
I'm
I
sure.
did.
I remember seeing that.
Something on the bucket list.
See, I could never do that. I could never do that unless I had like a big cut target goal. But I guess that was your goal, to complete that 100K. So that made sense. But I don't know how people do these super long runs when they don't have a big race coming up. I'm not wired that way. I need to have a deadline to be fit and something to know, okay, I've got 65 days until game day. Like that's how I'm going to get through my 40K run today. So yeah, man, that's 100K.
That's a good one. You got a great memory. No, I don't know either. It was a horrific experience. It was something that I remember waking up. My wife was away for the weekend, and I thought, okay, well, this has been something I've always wanted to do. I was kind of doing some preseason football work, and I was like, well, I'll see if we can do it. And dude, it was just horrific. I think I ran I ran the first 30Ks, and then I kind of just walked on and off for ages, and then people were saying to me, I reckon when you get within sort of 10K from home, it'll feel easy. And it was none of that. I remember, this sounds like I'm making it up. Cross my heart, truth.
No.
I got to 1K to go, and I was like, I don't think I can finish. I just don't know how I'm going to. I don't know how I'm going to get to the end point. So somehow I did. I paid for it as well. I was a bit crook for a couple of days. You know when you're on the brink of, you can feel a flu or a cold kicking in. I remember for like 3 days after that, I was like, you're doing absolutely nothing because you've just smashed yourself. But yeah, man, that was I'm no down Fino Chiara, who's just an ultra marathon man down here. Don't know if you know him, but he'd be an interesting bloke to get the cameras in front of. But dude, actually, speaking of cameras in front of him, that was the whole reason, or the original reason. Before I realized you were a marathon man, I mentioned before I hit record that Sweat Elite, the training sessions, have come up on a number of podcasts, and I've sort of been going down the YouTube rabbit hole in the world of running. I've got a YouTube channel for relaxed running as well, and one of the pages that keeps coming up was Sweat Elite. So I did a little bit of research after speaking to Izzy last week, and was mind blown to see that it was your good looking face behind it all. So I had to reach out to you and ask you about it. Dude, give us a rundown on that, because I know YouTube does the year or the timelines in a different way. It can be almost 2 years that a video has been up, but it still says 1 year until it crosses that 2 year threshold. And I rewound down to the bottom of your page the other day, just because you got 110,000 people following along and really good content. And it says you've only been doing it for a year, which is ridiculous in terms of how much traction you've got in such a short amount of time. But also, no surprise when you see blokes like Paul Chalamo and everyone else you've had up there. Give us a little bit of a breakdown on the story behind
Yeah.
Sweat Elite, because it appears as though it's a crazy story.
Yeah, it is one. I mean, I think it is a little bit of a crazy story, and no, I appreciate the kind words there. I mean, so back to what I mentioned earlier, where I was 84 kilos and living in Singapore. I left that job with some savings and thought, okay, I'm 29. That was at the time 30, and I wanted to try my hand at maybe another startup or two. I'd had a few startups, of which most of them didn't really work out the way I would have liked them to. One did reasonably well and was able to sort of offload one to an acquirer in a small way. But I had some savings and I thought, I want to get back into running. I've put on a little bit of weight. I was a little bit involved in the running scene in Singapore as well, because I was the manager at Flight Centre Active Travel and we were sponsoring some runners, and I was sort of watching some of the marathon events. And I thought, right around the same time, my friend challenged me to that sub 3 hour marathon, and I thought, I never really was very content with the media and the content when I was a middle distance runner. And I thought to myself, the one thing I really wanted as a middle distance runner or a long distance runner was more resources around athletes training and how they became as good as they are. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, I think to start with, I could at least just get some interviews happening with some professional runners, put it on a blog, some training logs, and basically just take it from there. So that was in 2016. So I interviewed a whole lot of runners, some Australian runners, some German runners, some American runners, about their training leading into specific races, and just basically put it on a blog. And at the time, I was a little bit clueless as to where I was going to go with it. I just wanted to have more information out there about training, rather than having to go down to a local bookstore and buy the Sebco book. I thought it's about time this is maybe transitioned to the internet, and that's where it started. And then from there, it basically, very quickly, I saw 500,000, 1,500 people per day coming to the website. That was probably over a 6-month period. And I thought, okay, how can I sort of turn this into a business if I can? And the first idea that came in probably 6 months in was, maybe I can turn it into a sort of like a subscription model where we're just continuously adding more and more content onto the website, and people can pay a small fee to subscribe, much like subscribing to a newsletter or a magazine. So we did that. And slowly over time, we sort of built up a following of a few thousand people on the subscriber area. And then in 2019, we added a podcast, which we've had over 100 episodes now, just interviewing athletes about their build-ups to certain events and so forth. And in 2019, it really occurred to me that in order to take this business to the next level and sort of stand out more in the running media scene, I think video was really important. There was a lot of websites out at that point publishing a lot of content about running training and build-ups, and I thought, okay, the ability to sustain this over the long term for charging people for this content is probably going to be difficult. So I think the video space is where we want to go. And so in late 2019, I decided to take a big plunge with it, I guess, and went online and did a few videography courses and learned how it all works, and watched a whole lot of FlowTrack's old stuff, which was very inspiring. And then I moved to Boulder in early 2020 with the hope that I'd stay there for about a year and try and get some videography up. And COVID struck very shortly after that, and I went home to Australia and sort of stuck that period out, and then moved back to Boulder in 2021 in April, and then put the first video on the channel in May. So it is almost 2 years now. It's about a year and a year and 10 months. But yeah, it's a bit crazy to me actually to think how many people have viewed our videos and the subscribers, because I never would have thought it would have grown that fast. Honestly, I've just sort of been putting the work out there and hoping that people would enjoy it. And I spoke to you offline before we started that now we're really venturing down the space of having brands involved in these videos, which we didn't plan on at the start. We hoped to be able to monetize purely by users, but we have learned that that's difficult. For a few reasons that are sort of quite long and complicated to talk about, mostly around the fact that there's just so much good free content online now that most people just don't feel the need to pay for it. But yeah, brands are investing a lot in our videos now, including Asics, Nike, and Garmin. So that's really cool. And yeah, so I think there's been 150 something videos put up now, and it's been lots of mistakes made, lots of things I've learned, lots of quite a lot of behind the scenes challenges that we don't speak about. Sometimes I've flown to film an athlete and they've cancelled on me. So that's a bit difficult to work with when you spend the money to go there, and there's that's just your loss. But on the outside, it definitely looks like it's going well, and I do hope that people are enjoying watching the videos, and there's a lot more plans in the next sort of 6 to 12 months to expand into triathlon as well. I think triathlon's a really interesting space for us. But yeah, which videos have you been watching, and which have you enjoyed?
Well, dude, I actually really enjoyed your lead up to. I think I watched the most recent one that you put up. I think 3 or probably 4 days ago. I think I watched it last night, just getting ready for this, and just to hear your thoughts around getting ready for the marathon. That I went to your most popular videos, and I really, and
Chalimos.
not just for oh, incredible, dude. Like how beautiful is that guy to watch run? Like just even the thumbnail that you had on, just with his name and him on the track. Like I look at that and I go, how can you not, like, even if you're not a runner, like you look at that technique and you go, I want to see it. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed that one as well. Just to and just hearing, was that you behind the camera there? I
yeah,
At that stage, I don't know if I recognize. Yeah, so I heard the Aussie accent. I wasn't 100% sure if it was you, but it was just good. I really liked his attitude towards what the session was as well. Like I don't know if it was hot or whether it was a hard session or a combination of the two. But just to hear him speak about, hey, this is something I've chosen to do. I want to be here. I thought that's the attitude you've got to take into a session or anything complicated. Like whenever you hit a brick wall or whenever you hit something, some form of an obstacle, it's like, no, like that reminder to yourself is so beneficial. So as much as I enjoyed watching him run and hearing your questions, I liked his answers to the questions as well.
yeah.
Um, Dude,
No, I'm glad.
have watched quite a few before I realised you were the man behind it. I saw there were three. I think they were New Zealanders or Dutch, maybe I can't remember. They were training in Kenya. They had a van next to them, and they were sort of
Yep.
just doing a marathon session, maybe 3 by 5K up along sort of a road. And what I like about it, as much as I like hearing about the training and the running and the questions, I like seeing the different locations. Like, I just reckon
Yeah.
seeing the different, like, oh, these guys are in Kenya. This is where the Kenyans train. Wait, this is Kip Keino Stadium. What the heck? Like, it's just, I think that's really enjoyable. I was trying to put my finger on exactly what I like, but I think there's probably 4 or 5 factors or 4 or 5 things that I really enjoy that aren't necessarily just related to running and session structure. It's just, yeah, you seem to have tapped into a real sweet spot. So have you got? I think Izzy was telling me that you've got different videographers working for you in different locations, or like how does the team element of it work? Are you doing it all by yourself? Have you got people editing? Because it looks like it would
Yep.
be a fairly big undertaking for one man.
Yeah, just quickly on the locations part. It's funny. I never really thought about that until someone randomly said early on in the channel. They commented on it saying, "I love pretty much what you just said." They said, "I love the workouts and I love meeting the people, but I really like seeing the locations that you're training at because." And I've had a lot of comments about that over the last year and a half, and oftentimes because people oftentimes think I want to go to Flagstaff, but all I can see online is some basic pictures of the trails. But watching your videos, I can really see what it's like to train in Flagstaff properly. And it's a really cool byproduct and sort of like secondary reason why people watch the videos. So it's funny that you say that because it's nothing that really ever crosses my mind when I film that, oh, maybe just the background and the scenery is interesting to people. But it definitely is when it comes to Kenya, Flagstaff, Boulder, etc. But yeah, so in terms of the team, yeah, so we actually don't have any full-time staff. I'm the only one. We've just got a lot of contractors that I'm connected with around the world. Very lucky that a lot of professional videographers in the running and triathlon scene have reached out to me over the last year and a half. I've put a couple of Instagram posts up looking for people that people have responded to. But we basically work on video by video, project by project basis. So I'll say to a videographer in Flagstaff, okay, we've got XYZ athlete that wants to do this workout and be filmed. Would you be up to doing it on this day? And each project is just the same. So they film the workout, they edit the workout themselves. They know the style because there's sort of a guide that I've put together that people read and they know the basic style. And if they've reached out to me in the first place, they've probably watched the video and they probably know what it looks like. And yeah, that's how it works. And then I just pay them for that particular video. And now we're doing more video series. So we're doing like a 8-part series on one particular athlete leading into one race or one event. So that videographer would then have the entire series to work with that athlete. So it's a little bit more of a commitment. So that's how it works. And I don't think we'll ever transition to really needing someone full time, because the tricky thing that I'm currently dealing with now, which is a bit of a strange problem to have, is that we probably have the ability to produce a lot more content, but I'm not really sure if that would be a good idea, because the market and the amount of people that are interested in these videos, in the grand scheme of things, is pretty small. We're talking about maybe a few 100,000 in the world would actually want to watch these things, and if you do a video every day, it's hard to keep up with that. I mean, we have actually had periods of time where we've done sort of a 5 to 6 a week, and we didn't have the best response to it. People were sort of like, it's just an overload of content, and it's hard to keep up with what you're doing. And I think the 2 to 3 a week is ideal. So rather than doing more quantity, we're looking at sort of just making the videos better in a simple
Mm.
sense. And so right now I'm actually really studying and trying to understand. I'm looking at other triathlon YouTube channels and running YouTube channels and trying to go, okay, well, what can we do better within these videos? Like, how can we actually make these videos better quality? Like, what are the questions that we can ask athletes that are going to make this more interesting? What are the mistakes that we're making in videos that we can improve on? How can we maybe edit these down to be shorter but more appealing and more interesting? So these are the questions I'm asking myself now, rather than working on quantity. I'm working more on how do we improve our quality of video. And luckily, expanding into triathlon, where we haven't done a lot of video yet, I think that's a really important question to ask right now as we're venturing into a new space with new things to think about. Because filming a bike session, a swimming session is quite different, especially a bike session is quite different to filming a running session. So it's almost like we're starting from scratch with the triathlon in a way, even though we have already filmed some triathletes doing running workouts already. So I'm spending many hours actually of my weeks looking at the best content in triathlon. So anyone listening that knows triathlon content would know Lionel Sanders is the big one. Daniel Backergaard is another really, really good triathlete that has a great channel. So I'm watching episode by episode of their stuff and jotting down notes, being like, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that. That video is doing this better than we're doing it. So that's what's on my mind right now, and I'm trying to then share those thoughts and insights with the other videographers out there, so that they can incorporate into their videos too. So yeah, it's exciting. It is a big undertaking, but I love it, man. I really enjoy it, and yeah, we've briefly exchanged messages, here and there over the last decade when we've been noticing each other doing entrepreneurial things. So I appreciate you reaching out and asking these questions, but yeah, it's a big undertaking, but I'm enjoying it for sure, and I can't complain when I wake up in Tokyo, and I mean, there's whole other challenges involved in the travel that people don't think about, like sleeping consistently and stuff. So those things people don't really factor in as well. But it'd be interesting to see where we're at in 2 years, for sure. I think with the triathlon being front of mind as well. So we'll see.
It's exciting, man. It's exciting. So, what, you got a couple of? You're in Tokyo now. You said you got a couple of days left there before you head to Berlin. Was it first?
Yeah, Berlin on the 10th. So Tokyo Marathon is this weekend, and then we'll go. I'm heading off on the Friday to Berlin, where we're doing our first project with Nike. So Nike are launching their Vaporfly 3, and we're going to do some videos with the Berlin Track Club, where they're going to be rolling out the Vaporfly 3 on their channel. Yeah, stoked to be doing that with Nike, and hopefully there's some more stuff with them coming as well. So yeah, that's super exciting, and that'll be on the channel towards the end of March as they're preparing for the Berlin half. And so this is the position we really wanted to be in, where we're able to show workout videos, but then also incorporate it with like a shoe rollout, because everyone's so fascinated by the. I'm not sure if you've yet really ventured down the space of the whole super shoe, game, because that's a whole other thing that's going on in the sport right now as well. So. Yeah, hopefully people find those videos interesting, and it's also really important for us to find the right balance between creating the original content, but it not being like too much of an advert for Nike. That's something I'm really trying to think about as well now, because the last thing we want is for people to think, oh, they had this really cool channel going and there was original, unique content, and then all of a sudden it's like this advertising board. Like we want to avoid that at all costs. So yeah, when I'm editing now, I'm really making sure we don't want it to be too branded. We want it to be branded just enough so that the brand gets enough out of it, but it still seems like it's pretty original. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Oh, dude, seriously, I've left this double inspired for my marathon career and for the future of Sweat Elite, dude. You're the kind of guy that I think with the passion like that. And you mentioned, I can't remember on air or off air, but with the um, I like talking to people who've had a swing and said, "All right, well that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. Oh, what about?" And just keep getting back up, and it's cool to see something take off like it has, brother. So I'm pumped to watch the next 12 months and beyond. And man, we'd love to have you back on. Like, even if it's just to talk about marathon training and running and stuff like that, it feels very easy to talk. And people who listen to this seem to love the marathon talk. So it's an open platform for you, brother. So if you ever want to come on and just go back and forth, let's do it.
Yeah, for sure, man. I appreciate that very much. I mean, I've definitely had like you know, had a lot of swings and a lot of misses, and you know, I could talk for hours about all the failures. But when it comes to marathon talk, I'm always keen to discuss that. Just don't ask me about muscle cramping. Anything else, I'm all here for. I don't know how to solve the muscle cramps.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm more than happy to come back on at some point and talk about, you know, things I've learned in the marathon training space, and more probably relating to pros that I've been filming and how they've been preparing, because there's a big spectrum of approaches to marathons. You know, we're currently doing a video series with Richard Ringer, who's the European champ from the European Championships last year from Germany, and he's run 2:08, and he doesn't do more than 125k a week, which is really interesting. He does a lot of cross training though, so that's a completely different approach. And you know, after this video series where I speak more with him about his lead up to the Hamburg marathon, I'd be more than happy to share more insights about that. So, yeah, no, I appreciate the offer, man. It'd be good to come back on at some point soon, maybe after London. We'll see. But yeah, all the best in your next few months, getting marathon fit. And I will say that with the concern around the misses, just tell her that, you know, you can get that stuff back later. It's just a short period of time where we can run a quick marathon. So
that's a good point. That's a good point. I'll see if
yeah.
I can sell it to her. All right, brother. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Cool, man. Thanks so much.
See you later. See everybody.